So yeah, I don't live in Hoboken, but I live in a town right next to Hoboken. And some of my first memories are of Hoboken because when I was growing up in the early 70s, there was still passenger ships in Hoboken. They were just dying out. So one of my first memories is actually standing in front of this massive porthole covered steamship. I don't exactly know what slip it was, but it was there, and that's one of my first memories. It had to be around 1970. Had to be. So ever since then, I've been obsessed with Hoboken. I would live here, Bob, but I can't afford to live here. I could barely afford to live in Jersey City. But I do spend time here, and this summer I spent pretty much my entire summer in Hoboken. You might have seen me running around with a drone, a camera, a clipboard, a cane. That would have been me if you spotted me. Maybe being escorted off of a property by the police. That's probably me. So I would like to open this up. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I know it's raining outside. But I would like to open this up with a sonnet because this summer I wasn't only in Hoboken, I was also, for some reason, reading Lord Byron and William Wordsworth. I don't know what made me do that. But I'm glad I did because I came across a sonnet by Wordsworth from his book Ecclesiastical Sonnets of William Wordsworth. And this is part 3, sonnet number 17, called Places of Worship. And this really knocked me off my feet because it made me think of Hoboken. And this is written circa 1830. As star that shines dependent upon star is to the sky while we look up in love, as to the deep fair ships, which though they move seem fixed to eyes that watch them from afar, as to the sandy desert fountains are with palm groves shaded at wide intervals, whose fruit around the sunburnt native falls of roving tide or desultory war. Such to this British Isle her Christian fanes, each linked to each for kindred services, her spires, her steepled towers with glittering vanes far kenned, her chapels lurking among trees, where a few villagers on bended knees find solace, which a busy world disdains. You may be thinking, what does this have to do with Hoboken? I just love how Wordsworth talks about how all of the churches in London are linked, not because they're religious buildings, but because of their architecture, their steeples, and their flying buttresses. And therefore, they're one. And I was thinking about Hoboken this summer like that. Every sacred space I was going to, I'm like, God, I feel like it's linked. You take one out, and all the others will fall apart. Maybe it's just me. That's how I read it. But so I wanted to share that with you. So I'm going to talk about 4 different sacred sites from Hoboken for this talk. Now, I have to tell you, this would have been a 4-hour lecture. Easily, maybe 6. But Bob had a few words with me. And I said, okay, we're going to whittle this down. And I'm going to kind of fly through things. So I would say buckle up. Okay. For anyone who's thinking, well, what about St. Joseph's? What about First Baptist Church of Hoboken? What about Trinity Lutheran? Why aren't they included? All I can say is come back for the next show. Okay. Because this will not be over until I get every site. And then I'll feel good about it. And then I'll feel like, okay, I really did understand this poem, this sonnet. So what I would like to do is start off with the film for the first site. Would you like to see this film? Thank you, because it cost me a lot of money to make. It's real short, 2 minutes. And this was made by my cinematographer friend, Rena Rose. Some of you might know Rena. She used to work for the Jersey Journal, as I used to for many years, and that's where I met her. And when the Jersey Journal closed, we stayed in touch and said, let's work together. So when she told me she had a drone inside of a suitcase, I was like, let's get to work. And this is the first site. So who knows what this building is? OLG, right? Our Lady of Grace. How do we do full screen? Control. That was it. Just couldn't remember the letter. Right. Now, I didn't put these in any particular order, as if, OLG is my favorite. I just whenever the drone was getting finished, that's what determined what order these were falling into place. So Our Lady of Grace, and I'm going to talk to you about those images we just saw. Has anyone ever been to Our Lady of Grace? I mean, the film catches the essence of it, but you do have to go to all of these sites yourself to experience the sounds inside these places, the creaks, the shadows, the shafts of light. Whatever it is, you need to go. So I can only show you so much, but you have to experience it on your own, even if you're not religious. Just go for the art and the architecture. So what I love about Hoboken houses of worship is that you can kind of see them from a distance, because a lot of them have tall steeples, or they're just tall buildings and big bulky buildings. So this is from almost the waterfront, and you could just look up 4th Street and see in the distance, these steeples and these towers. And these were the skyscrapers of their moment, of their time in the 1870s. So I always start my experience with buildings from a distance. And then, I build upon that experience with each step toward the site. And I want to talk to you about the exterior of Grace, because this is a rare. Does anyone know what this is? A lot of people think it's a bell tower. And notice where it is on the exterior of the building. It's at the crossing, where it's a cruciform shape. The transept meets the nave, and that's known as the crossing. And right at that crossing on the top is a tower, a spire. Does anyone know what its function is, though? No? Yeah, it's for ventilation of the church. So in the 1870s, if you wanted to really circulate the air inside the church, I wouldn't say air condition it, but to circulate it and clear it out or bring in fresh air, it would be through this the structure here. And it's beautiful. It's known as the flesh. And these are kind of rare. I see a few of these in New York City, but in Hudson County, this is the largest one. It's very substantial, and you can see it like we saw from a distance. In fact, it's taller than the actual steeple bell tower itself. So if you walk up to buildings real close like I do, sometimes trespass, you can start to find clues as to its history. And I always look first and foremost for the cornerstone. If there is a cornerstone, sometimes there is not a cornerstone, and I come across buildings everywhere, including in Hoboken, that do not have cornerstones, and that makes the journey into research all the more challenging. But Grace just throws itself out there. 1875, that's when the cornerstone was laid. Well, you have to think about what was Hoboken like at that time. It's not what we see today, right? It's not these modern buildings. It's not these tall buildings. If anything, this building, when it was finished, was the biggest building in Hoboken. It was the skyscraper for its time. I refer to these types of church buildings at this time period as big box churches, because that's what they were. Overdone, overblown, but that's what people wanted. They wanted to make a statement from the distance, from the sidewalk. And Grace is the only big box 1870s Catholic church that I know of that has flying buttresses. I'm not sure if these flying buttresses are functional or if are they just for show. I'm still not sure. I'm going to say that they are functional, that if you were to remove them, that there would be some cracks forming at some point. Who knows? But they look great, don't they? They remind us of, the 13th century French cathedral. I mean, that's what the architect was thinking of with this building. And you have to look for these. They're there. They're up there. Some of them are covered with trees. This one, it was the only exposed one. And when you start to really take in Our Lady of Grace, you see a lot of different gables and niches, and a lot of these niches are empty. And that's because the statuary, the memorial statues, were never commissioned or paid for over the years. Or some of them were there and they were toppled by a storm or something. And I see that occasionally. And what the parishes will do is they'll retrieve the fallen statue and put it in the garden, because who's going to pay to have it hoisted back up there? But it's brick and limestone. Really, it looks like a factory almost. I mean, look at that facade. This rich orange brick, known as Philadelphia brick. And this, 13th century French Gothic Revival exterior, although I call it vernacular because there's no way this compares to a 13th century cathedral in France. But it has echoes of it. And that's what architecture in cities really are. They're all echoes of something. I'm interested in the doors at Grace because this is like this one sliver to enter a huge building, and it's not like these great bronze doors. They're very rickety, if anything, and they almost feel like, a barn or something to enter it. But before we go in, let me just take you around the building, because I like to circle buildings and kind of study them and spend time on the outside. I mean, this has a huge apse on the end there. It's apsoidal, right? And that's where, when we go inside the church, you'll see a lot of the beautiful tapestries of glass. But these are overbuilt. These are thick walls. This is true masonry construction. Masons built this. And if you look down at the base of this big structure, you'll see you start to see some statuary scenes. And this is what they call the Calvary group. And this dates to the beginning of the church, 1870s. So this Calvary group of statuary has been out there since that time. And what I love about Grace is that it does have landscaping around it. They really thought about it. It's not accessible to the public. It's fenced off, but it's nice to look at a lawn, right? Especially in a city like Hoboken, where park space isn't, at the top of everybody's mind. And talk about gates. I look at all the details of a building, from the sidewalk to the manhole covers, to the cornerstones, to the pinnacles, and to the gates. And these are just massive cast iron gates from the 1870s that were meant to protect the priests. I mean, these are not easy to scale, and if you do, you're threatening yourself with impalement, but they're very architectural too. They're their own pinnacles, almost like their own steeples. And they're low maintenance, really. You just keep painting them. But when I entered the campus of Our Lady of Grace, Church of Our Lady of Grace, I was amazed by the size of the inner courtyards, and almost like a labyrinth where you just had to, I kind of got lost back there, going from one end of the property, because it's a super block. Our Lady of Grace takes up a super block in Hoboken. That means an entire block. There's nothing else but parish buildings. And to me, that's fun because I get to really explore and find these little nooks. So I was going all over. I was coming across different gardens, different sections of buildings. I came across the oldest part, which was a powerhouse sitting back there for the first church. The first church has been demolished, but the powerhouse remains. But it's the gardens that really caught me off guard, that are just there and well-maintained and just beautiful to sit in, although there was not a bench anywhere. And again, these labyrinths, leading to one end of the super block. And then there's other parish buildings. It's not just a church building that's part of Our Lady of Grace. There's also convents and rectories, and even the old schoolhouse. So I like to look at all of the buildings on the campus and find out their architectural history. So again, I look for the cornerstone. Makes my job so much easier. And this convent was built in 1915, and then I'm able to go back into the archives and look for information and find the different architects. And here's the school building. This is a tour de force of terracotta and brickwork. But this came later. This was in 1891. The parish was growing. I mean, look at the terracotta work on this building. This is the tower. Almost like it's its own church building, but it was actually a parochial school. So the cornerstone was 1891, and then in the 1950s, they did a modernization, and this happened a lot in the 50s and 60s in Hoboken and Jersey City, all of Hudson County, where they were rebuilding things and modernizing them. So this is a double cornerstone. I get really excited about that. And here's the building from across the street, really grand terracotta sheathed building. And there's an old ad for it when it was first built. Now, it's not a parochial school for Our Lady of Grace anymore. It's actually the site of the Hudson School. This is their location now, and it's big. It is big. But before Grace was built, and I'll talk about the architect, who I'm really blown away by, there were earlier buildings. And the first was in the 1850s. And it wasn't designed by Himpler, Francis Himpler, who designed the big one we see, the big box one. But it was designed by a local Hoboken architectural concern called Dietz and Deutsch. If that isn't German, I don't know what is. And they would also go on to design other church buildings in Hoboken, including All Saints. All Saints likes to say, well, Richard Upjohn designed our church. No, he didn't. It was two German architects from Hoboken. But I'll talk about All Saints in the next talk. And then, when you start to piece together the timeline for parishes, it's like puzzles. Things start to fall in place, and you start to see the building history, all the campaigns, the capital campaigns, as they called them. And you can see in 1874, that's when it's really going up, the parish. It's building a cathedral. They called it the Cathedral of the Newark Archdiocese. That was the plan. So you have to build it big, right? And make it stand out. But as we all know, the cathedral ended up being where? In Newark, right? I don't know what the politics was at that time. Somebody must have gotten mad at Hoboken and said, okay, we're going to build our cathedral in Newark. Kind of the same thing with the Newark Airport. It was supposed to be in Jersey City, on the where Route 440 is, and it came very close. And Frank Hague, the mayor, got pissed and said, we don't want it. And Newark was like, okay, we'll take it. So what was going on in Hudson County with big box church building? Well, you can kind of see the evidence today. Some of these remain, some do not. Some have been altered, some have been decommissioned, shut down. But you had mostly big Catholic church buildings being built, the real big box ones. And so you have, number one is St. Peter's. That's gone. That's in Jersey City. And that really fell down in the early 50s. It was just built on sandy soil. The piles did not go down all the way to the bedrock. It was a big problem, and it just started cracking and just came down. Number two is St. Patrick's, which I don't know if anyone's ever been inside this building. Really incredible. Some of the best stained glass I've seen anywhere. They're still open. But if you go to a service on a Sunday, it's just you and pews enough to seat 4,000 people. And just lots of shadows in there. Incredible, yeah. And then number three, St. Michael's in Hamilton Park, which is now thriving. And they were endangered of closing, but huge church also. And really, I gave a tour of Hamilton Park a few months ago, and we went in there, and people's jaws just dropped, because of the stained glass and all the carvings and the organ. Time capsule right to 1872. So all of these buildings I'm showing you were built during Our Lady of Grace's time period. So it's almost like they were in competition with each other, the different parishes. Who can build bigger? Who can build bolder? Some might say more beautiful. It's debatable whether some of these are beautiful. Number 4 is St. Bridget in Jersey City. No longer a house of worship. It is now broken up inside into condominiums. Pretty spectacular apartments. I've been in them. You know, if you want to sleep under a rose window, a massive rose window, you can do it right there. St. Joseph's on number 5. That's in the Journal Square area. Has anyone ever been inside this church? We just gave a tour of that neighborhood and we went in there. Some of the best woodwork I've seen, right? Some of the best carved wood from 1868. So this predates Our Lady of Grace, actually. 1868. And then Holy Cross in Harrison, number 6. People are like, where's Harrison? I recommend, take the path out there, walk around. You will come across this massive church, another big box, neo-Gothic. And then to me, the biggest one is number 7. Anyone know where number 7 is without reading it? Have you heard of Union City? Yeah, so this is on Monastery Place because this was St. Michael the Archangel Monastery and Church. And this is also 1860s, this building. And this has a dome that would knock you off your seats. It's no longer a Catholic church. It is a Korean Presbyterian and has been for many decades, actually. But the monastery has been torn down, and all that remains is the church building. So again, these were all competing with each other. Who could do it better? And I think Hoboken had the idea that they could do it better. And one might argue that they could. Because we look at it today, OLG is looking pretty good from a preservation standpoint. They've taken care of their massive building. I don't know how they do it. But here's Francis Himpler, the architect of Our Lady of Grace. And there's his census records. I love looking up census records because you start to find out who's living in the house with them. Some of you might know how to do this, what their occupation is. And his says architect. If you look at the top, you can see it, the word architect. Born in Prussia. I would say that's Germany, right? He was born in Germany. Poland, near the border. Western, right? Yeah. And we know Poland's borders have shifted so many times, over history. There you go. There you go. Well, he was from there. And it's incredible. He had a remarkable career as an architect in Germany. You would think, he was just a Hoboken architect. They just do a couple of brownstones and maybe one church. No, when I looked this guy up, I could not believe what I was finding. Well, he did a few buildings in Hoboken. I'll talk about them, but I want to take you to his European buildings. Well, actually, no, let's stay in this country. These are the buildings he did around the country. St. Alphonsus was demolished because it was also falling down. So this was near what became the Holland Tunnel portal in New York City, and it came down because of structural issues. Of course, architects never blame themselves. They blame the engineers. That happens a lot. So that, unfortunately, was lost. But Saints Peter and Paul in St. Louis, which is their cathedral, was designed by our Hoboken architect. And I call him a Hoboken architect because he was proud to be a Hoboken resident. And not only was he a resident here for almost his entire adult life, because he came here quite young, but he was a parishioner at Our Lady of Grace. It was his church, so it meant a lot to him. And here are some other buildings in America by him. The St. Francis de Sales in Ohio, Cincinnati, still there. St. Joseph Shrine in Detroit. Who told me they were from Detroit earlier? Was that Vera? Yeah. Do you know this church, Vera? You don't? It's in the middle of Detroit, and it's a designated landmark, and it's designed by our Francis Himpler. But let's go to Europe, because this is what got me. Okay? So he has a few existing buildings in Europe, not many. You can count them on like 3 fingers. But this is St. Catarina, still there, a local landmark. This is St. Joseph's, also in Germany. This is a tour de force. I mean, look at this thing. He designed this, so he was doing quite well. My question is, what made him pack up and come to Hoboken? You know, that's maybe additional research can help me find that. But he didn't keep any journals, any diaries, any memoirs. So we kind of have to try to figure things out. But these are all, I mean, tour de forces. I mean, really incredible. This is what he was doing. And then he comes and does stuff like this in Hoboken. You know, he starts off with doing little tiny firehouses and brownstones. This is now, of course, the fire museum. Yeah. Who knows who's been there? Great little museum. Terrific museum. But it's designed by Orwell G's architect, one of his first designs. So this gave him hope. So he went from doing stuff like that to doing stuff like this, but he was humble about it. And then he started getting bigger, larger commissions. So here's what was Sacred Heart Academy on Washington. Now it's site of the Hoboken Charter School, and good for them because it's a beautiful building, although that facade could be returned to its original. Anybody here from Hoboken Charter School? Darn. Here's Himpler's brownstone that he designed. Still here. And in 1977, there was a walking tour of Hoboken, and they put his house on the tour. Because he still had family here up until the 70s. He still had descendants. And then after Our Lady of Grace, he becomes pretty famous locally. And that's when all these other big commissions are coming around the country for him. But we probably know him best as the architect of City Hall in Hoboken. What? You didn't know that? Yeah, 1880, off of his, huge success with this beautiful church. And there it is. Looks a little bit different today, right? An addition was put on the front later on. It's not clear if he designed that addition because he was still alive at that time, but he wasn't living in Hoboken. He had moved. And here's another image. So let's go back to Our Lady of Grace for a second. It's across the street from what we call Church Square Park. It was called St. Mary's Park originally because the first church building that OLG built was known as St. Mary's Parish. It was called St. Mary's. And then at some point, they switched over. When they were getting ready to build bigger, they changed their name to Our Lady of Grace. And the park, it really interests me, this park, because it dates back to 1804, and this is when John Stevens was laying out or planning out a modern city known as Hoboken. So he hired landscape architects to design park squares. And around it, what happens? A residential neighborhood, and in this case, a religious neighborhood. And these are the records at the Archdiocese Archives. This one is from 1874, and the priest and the architect are making arguments to the archbishop. Listen, we have to build it big and not cut corners. We have to use the best technology for building. And they're talking about the thickness of stone walls. I don't know, stuff like this really interests me. And also what kind of foundation should they go for? Because they want to build it so big that it has to stand and not fall down. And so even the priest started sketching out ideas at that time. And he's like, well, look how far. According to the architect, we can go this far down. And that's exactly what they did. They went down to the bedrock. And of course, building technology at the time, you cannot penetrate the bedrock in the 1870s, but you can put a wooden pile on top of it, and you could drop 5,000 wooden piles, and the building will not go anywhere. So when they're done with this, or when he's done with this church, it starts to look like this, what we see today. And you can see the dimensions, 200 feet in length. So when you walk in there, that altar, that high altar, is pretty far from that door that we saw earlier. And it's the widest church also. So it's 90 feet, 96 feet in width. So you go in there, and I don't know, this is my impression. I'm like, oh my God, which side of this building do I sit on? Because I feel like I'm going to get lost in this pew, sitting in this pew on this side. It's really incredible. And they filled up this church every day with thousands of people. And you can see the architect was taking out ads, proposals for masonry and brickwork. Later in 1912, when everyone forgot about Francis Hempler, he came back to design a memorial, a little apsoidal memorial dedicated to Father Kelly, who was this very popular priest in the parish, and the parishioners raised money to design or to pay for this memorial. So this forgotten architect, in a way, came back to finish his building. And this is the chapel today, and there's a plaque there talking about it being dedicated. So in a way, Francis Hempler, this was his second chapter, this little tiny chapel for this big building that he did. And then he dies in 1916. These are articles from outside of Hoboken and Hudson County. They didn't really report on his death. You know, Cincinnati reported on it because they appreciated him for his building. Really incredible. So when you go in, expect your senses to be overwhelmed by artwork everywhere you look. And not just little tiny paintings, like everything on a large scale. So you go in there and you see these massive Stations of the Cross that look like buildings unto themselves. And this is known as Munich ware. So Munich ware is kind of rare material today. They don't even make Munich ware. It's former plaster with a secret ingredient, kind of like Tiffany windows. And you could sculpt it, shape it, paint it, and it was lightweight. So you would think this is heavy marble or something, but it's not. It's plaster. And you could actually affix it to the wall. And this is descriptions of it in the 19th century. There's a really nice picture of it. These have not changed. These are still there as if they've never been touched. So you have these stations on both sides, massive, and then the deeper you walk into the church, you get close to the high altar. I know my reaction was, "There's more? What is this? This is crazy. I've never seen so much artwork." And it's all variety. It's all murals, paintings, carvings, sculptures, woodwork, and then the stained glass. So the center altar, you can see the specs here, 30 feet, 37 feet high, 21 feet wide. I mean, these pictures really can't do them justice, or do the altar justice. You have to stand in front of this. And it's just massive. And again, it's lightweight. It's made of wood. It's carved wood. And then you have these, 20-foot high oil paintings that are replicas of famous paintings from around the world. And this one was painted, the Crucifixion, in 1904 by John Francis Kaufman, who was really a very famous religious painter at that time. And parishes were fighting over him to have him paint replicas of, Raphael's and Michelangelo's and everything else. And then he would add his little touches to them. But they're pretty valuable now, these paintings. And this is the Nativity that he painted in 1903. Really incredible. This is oil on canvas. And Kaufman was kind of famous because he was the first to do a painting of the sitting Pope, Pius X. And they made him famous, and they published it and circulated it around the world, and his name became known, and everybody wanted to hire him. But those stained glass, those Stations of the Cross, were designed by a company called Meyer and Company. Maybe you've heard of them. They were a Munich-based, later New York City-based, stained glass firm, but they also did statuary and Stations of the Cross. And they're the ones who came up with the, quote, Munich ware. And they stamped and signed all of their work, like they were copywriting their work. And if you look behind these kind of creepy statues, some of them, I know as a kid I was afraid of these types of things. You know, they really creeped me out. Now they don't. But I always look to see who the artists are. And if you look in the back, maybe throw a flashlight on it, you'll find it. And this translates to Meyer and Company, Munich, the art preserving all arts. And I think they're referring to, you know, they're reviving an ancient art form. They're preserving this art form. And then just, you walk anywhere in this building and you just look down any corridor or angle and you see artwork hanging. And when I saw this, I was like, you have to be kidding me. Anybody know who painted the original just by looking at that painting? Come on, he just had an exhibit at the Met. Raphael, right. So what's interesting about this replica, we'll call it a replica, is that it's older than you think. It's older than this church building. In fact, it was gifted to St. Mary's, when it was called St. Mary's, in the 1850s as a gift. And the painting was already ancient when they received it as a gift. So we don't know really how old this painting is. It's not the original, of course, but it was painted several centuries ago, obviously. And it's still in the church. So when they rebuilt the big box building, they moved all of their treasures with them. I find that fascinating. And this frame alone is amazing. But it's really, to me, it's the stained glass inside Our Lady of Grace that really captures my imagination and kind of makes my heart stop. Because this is all original to the building, to the 1870s. And you don't see a lot of glass in Hudson County this old. There's a few spots in Hudson County. Our Lady, I'm sorry, not Our Lady, but Grace Episcopal Church in Jersey City has glass that dates to the building 1852. But for a Catholic church building, this is the oldest glass that I'm aware of. So the aisles are just filled with 35 feet tall tapestries of glass. Most of it grisaille like this, just patterned, straight out of the William Morris era. You know, just these beautiful patterns. You could turn them into tapestries if you want, but these are glass tapestries. And then you start to see these figural scenes from the 1870s. These are just so luminous. You have to catch them in the right light. Nothing has been adjusted in these photos. These are actual colors. So 1874, okay? Nothing has changed in this glass. You know, stained glass is magical like that. Unless you smash it and paint it over or tar it over or cover it over with plywood, it will remain as if newly minted. So these biblical scenes, which are beautifully rendered. I mean, look at that Garden of Eden scene on the left. I think, yeah, I zoom in on it. I mean, if I were a kid, I'd be fascinated by this, just looking up at it. I mean, this predates the Ten Commandments with Charlton Held. Thank you. But really incredible scene. And this, so the width on this is like 8 feet, you know, by 12 feet. And that's just the figural section. And there are side chapels too. There are shrines. This church is so big that it just has random side chapels that are like little churches unto themselves. And of course, emblazoned with eye-popping glass like this. Just so rich. What do you think, Shireen? Some people say it's the rose window that's the masterpiece. I might agree, but I kind of like that Garden of Eden scene a lot. My eyes are drawn to that a lot. But this is gigantic, and it's original too, and really in great shape. Okay, so I'm not done with Our Lady of Grace. Let me finish something up here. So the best part of it, I haven't even told you about. So I told you about Francis Hempler, the architect, right? And all these replicas and Meyer and company. But there's somebody even more important who took it to the next level years after it was dedicated. So I'm going to read you something that I wrote about this next level situation for the Jersey Journal. And it relates to this man right here, who was a contemporary of William Morris, some say even better. I've come to Hoboken in search of illumination. Standing inside the eastern gate of Church Square Park, I glimpsed through trees the gaping portal of the Church of Our Lady of Grace, a Gothic colossus of red brick and yellow terracotta trim that was the largest Roman Catholic church in New Jersey when it was consecrated in 1878. Carrying an original copy of an obscure 1899 publication entitled Souvenir of the Adornment by Painting and Statuary of the Church of Our Lady of Grace, written by the equally obscure architect, decorator, organ builder, and author George Ashdown Audsley, I follow winding, rain-drenched paths across the park to Willow Avenue. There, between 4th and 5th Streets, the grandiose structure, familiar to anyone who has seen the classic film On the Waterfront, appears in its ecclesiastical entirety, abundantly surfaced with stone traceries, mounting pinnacles, and sloping copper roof levels shouldering each other. I didn't want to mention On the Waterfront. There are actually two buildings that are related to On the Waterfront that I didn't want to mention because that you can find in Wikipedia, you know. Astounded by this magnificent mass of masonry and glass, I enter its double doors and am struck by a barely lit tableau of rising pillars that spring into ribs that reach to vaulted ceilings. A sea of empty pews pulls me forward, past rows of pointed lancet windows stained with sinuous symbols. I feel the old plank board middle aisle floor sink slightly beneath my feet. 3 intricately carved walnut altars appear in the apse, mounted by miniature saints. Muted murals and framed paintings, some of which hung in the First Grace Church, built in 1855, line the walls. Above the freestanding main altar, which rises almost 40 feet, a series of stained glass windows depict the mysteries of the Virgin Mary. As I look up, I take in more murals of annunciations, crucifixions, and heavenly ascensions that seem to swell with the height. Fancily framed 19th century replicas of Raphael's are hung in niches over curtained confessionals. Haunting statues of the Sacred Heart, St. Anthony of Padua, Christ, and other biblical icons occupy corners and darkened alcoves. That's the other thing I love about Grace. There are so many dark corners in there and dark angles, and you can just sit there and just hang out by yourself in these dark corners. 14 11-foot-high Stations of the Cross, sculpted in plaster or Munich ware by the famed Meyer Studios of Munich, are affixed to the walls directly below the windows. Even with all this adornment, I do not find at first any trace of what I am anxiously seeking. Audley's elaborate polychromatic stencil work, a vast experiment he had previously only done with religious and literary manuscripts. Comparing photographic prints and line drawings inside the fragile 1899 document to what lies before me, it is obvious that Audsley's symbolic decorations in Our Lady of Grace are tragically long erased. So what he stenciled on the ceilings is gone, or so I thought. Audsley, who had established himself famously as a European architect, author, and illuminator in Liverpool, England, immigrated to America in 1892. While he struggled to obtain church contracts, he found some success as a designer of art galleries, school buildings, mansions, and early skyscrapers. The Bowling Green building at 11 Broadway in Lower Manhattan is perhaps his most famous commercial commission, and thankfully continues to stand, its exterior stone stenciling a reminder of his brilliance. And I'll show you a photo of that building that's still there, an early skyscraper. And when it was finished, it was considered to be the largest and heaviest skyscraper in New York. Not the tallest, but the largest and heaviest. Our Lady of Grace, founded in 1851 and intended to be the first cathedral of the nascent Newark Archdiocese, was designed in 1875 by German architect and Hoboken resident Francis Hempler. When done, the church still seemed to be lacking interior luster, so Audsley was hired in the late 1890s to decorate its blank walls and ceilings. While Audsley heeded the French Gothic influences of Himpler's massive Hoboken edifice, he found its inner design elements severely lacking, and the Reverend Charles J. Kelly allowed the illuminator to brighten every inch, seen or unseen, of the voluminous interior. Excited about his large-scale chance to prove that architectural components can, like 12th century manuscripts, be gloriously illuminated, Audsley embraced Our Lady of Grace as Michelangelo threw himself into the Sistine Chapel, filling it with soaring tiers of scaffolds. He and his apprentices spent countless hours among the vaults and spandrels of the higher regions of grace, scrolling them with sophisticated vellum leaves, religious symbols, curled vines, and brick patterns. At its completion in 1899, the interior of Our Lady of Grace glowed all at once in gold, its dank shadows replaced with lustrous colors and moving lines that miraculously brought Himpler's bulky architecture to life. Just when I think my mission has been in vain, I am prompted by Sister Maria, who has just met me in the sanctuary, to look up. Sure enough, above the altar, a vaulted dome ceiling reveals remnants of Audley's manuscript in the form of grapevines that swirl into trumpet shapes. Our Lady of Grace is fortunate enough to possess one other vestige of Audsley, an opulent pipe organ installed in 1907 above the choir loft, and nearly 100 years later, still operational. So not only did this man illuminate manuscripts and design buildings and stained glass, but he was also an organ builder and the author of like 50 major architecture books. Audsley's ventures into organ building and acoustics would eventually bring him worldwide fame and overshadow his architectural and decorative accomplishments. While I will never experience the full splendor and sublimity of Our Lady of Grace's lost manuscript, I depart the Hoboken monument grateful for the few illuminated pages that endure. So you must be wondering, what does this look like? Well, there's his organ, by the way. Itself a building. Itself, architecture within architecture. Now, he would go on to design more organs and advance the science of organ making. And the Wanamaker organ is based on his theories of organ building. Some of you might know that. He has very famous books out on it that he also illustrated. So Hoboken gets its beautiful organ for Our Lady of Grace. It was the only church building that could really take an instrument by this man who worked on large scales. And there's actually a plaque in there. It was rededicated in 1980, restored. And the plaque, you have to kind of look for these little hints also, is in one of the shadows. And then later, more restorations, because with organs, they need to keep being restored. Here's his book that made him famous in 1905, The Art of Organ Building, which is still used, still referred to. Of course, it's an antique, and there are more modern books on organ making, but his is like the Bible. And here's his organ in that book that would inspire the Wanamaker organ. And he was doing all his own illustrations and drawings and measurements. And he was inventing along the way. So this volume is, I think the Hoboken Public Library should have this. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Maybe there should be a collection of Audsley books. You can get them on eBay. So these books are just really incredible. Now, so before he comes to America, kind of like Himpler, he's designing incredible buildings in Europe. And his most famous is the New West End Synagogue in London, a world monument, like can never be demolished, visited by tourists, still in use as a synagogue, and inspired other synagogues to come worldwide. So this is his most famous building. So he comes to America for whatever reason, and he's having a hard time getting work, even though this is in his portfolio. Here's his building down in Lower Manhattan. It's like an illuminated manuscript on the outside, from bottom to top. So he treats everything as if it had to be illuminated. And he even designs furniture and plates for design magazines. This is at the Victoria and Albert Museum, his piece here. And he's even painting vessels and antiquities. Talk about a Renaissance, kind of like William Morris, you know, a Renaissance man. And he's banging out all these other publications that are making him famous. So Guide to the Art of Illuminating and Missal Painting. This is in 1862. So this is when he's still in Europe. I just had to throw in some of these ads from 1862. I thought they were great. You know, if you want to buy art supplies. I mean, do they even make brushes like this anymore? Sable brushes? I don't know. And then in 1865, he does, you know, Christian symbolism because he's interested in it. And he starts breaking down the elements of Christian architecture. And he draws everything. And in 1870, he's like, let me focus on Gothic cottages, drawing them. And this is one of my favorites from 1881, Outlines of Ornament. If anything, I think he inspired William Morris, you know, where he pushed him to new heights. And he had a lot of theory on colors and combining color for painting. Come on, if William Morris wasn't inspired by him, those who know William Morris's textiles, this looks like William Morris. They were contemporaries, but Audsley was a little bit before him. I mean, just gorgeous books. And you can get these on eBay for almost nothing. And they're very fragile, and they come to you like almost like dust. Now, this is his most famous book, believe it or not, from 1882. He's considered to be the first architect to bring the arts of Japan to, you know, the Western world. And this was a very influential book. Now, this you can't get for a few dollars. This will cost you a couple of grand. But look at the beautiful artwork he was doing. He was replicating artwork that he was seeing in Japan. And then some he was doing himself. And of course, the ads in the back were great. But really, and then in one of his last famous books in 1970, Color, Harmony, and Dress, and I love his dedication to the ladies of England. This manual is respectfully dedicated by their admirer, the author. And this was very influential for, what's that? Well, yeah, right. But he inspired, you have to get this book because the illustrations inside of, you know, styles of the 19 teens, he kind of invents it. He's like, oh, I have ideas for dresses and clothing for women. And it becomes a hit. And here he is with his color theory again. Real genius. I mean, an absolute genius. So back to the Our Lady of Grace. This is what he did to the ceiling. He turned it into what he thought was an actual illuminated manuscript, a medieval manuscript. That's what he believed the interiors of church buildings should be. All gone, painted over, whitewashed over the decades, except in the apse. There's that remnant. And this is what I was shocked to see, that this was forgotten. They forgot to paint this part over. Please don't tell that to Father Santora. But there it is. Really incredible. And this was the article I published back in the day. Oh, wait, and I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for Our Lady of Grace. So any questions about Grace before I move on? Yes. No, they're original. Yeah, they're not bronze doors like you see like at St. Patrick's Cathedral or St. John the Divine, right? Those are grand bronze, or Trinity Chapel, right? Those are grand. These are simple wooden doors. Oh, very rustic, right, right. Um, I would imagine that saved a lot on the cost. I would imagine. Yes. Hi, Mary. Mm-hmm. Irish and German. That's what Hoboken was. And they were actually sharing the same buildings. It wasn't just an Irish parish or a German parish. It was a combination. And then it became an Italian parish. And now it's just mixed, totally mixed. So you asked who paid for it? Yeah, the archdiocese paid for it. And also, yeah, they raised money with the congregation. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Because I'm going to now fly through the rest. How's everyone doing? Do you want to take a little break? Well, are you going to get up there, Richard, and scaffold? You're the resident artist in Hudson County, right? Are you going to go up there 80 feet above the floor? Wait, I shouldn't give him that idea, should I? I don't know. I would imagine it's been painted over so many different times, We're talking 1899, okay? A lot can happen between, now and then to buildings. I have no idea. I have no idea why. I would imagine maybe maintenance issues too. So instead of restoring stenciling, if there's a leak in the roof, just paint it over white, right? You repair the plaster and paint it and we're all good, right? But it's just no, this was the only church in Hudson County that he worked on. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to run ahead. Is that okay? All right. So I'm going to show you. Stop. Now we're going to go to a really incredible building. I mean, these are all incredible. I mean, that's why I selected them really right away. And then this one, right? So I had never been inside United Synagogue of Hoboken. Has anyone ever been inside? Okay. I had never been inside. I've seen the exterior over the years. So I was in for a real treat to enter this sanctuary, as you can see. But I'm going to pull up a little, and then how do I? Oh, Control L. Yes, a little cheat sheet I'm going to have here. And this is, I'm not going to show you a long slideshow like I did with Grace, only because we're running out of time. So, again, from the outside, I always start from the outside. I always look for clues, cornerstones, or in this case, plaques. And this has a prominent plaque right beyond the gate there. The Star of Israel. Jewish residents of Hoboken formed the Star of Israel congregation on October 10, 1905, and dedicated the synagogue on May 16, 1915. So the synagogue we see today, the shul, is from 1915, and it's a time capsule. Really, nothing has changed to it on the inside and the outside. Based on its architectural significance and uninterrupted life as an active synagogue since its construction, the Star of Israel was entered into the New Jersey Register of Historic Places on May 5, 2008, and into the National Register of Historic Places on June 27, 2008. That's pretty significant for a building to get 2 levels of designation. And it did go through really a high-profile restoration. I remember reading about it and going to look at the outside when it was happening. I was thrilled to see those onion domes, those Eastern European onion domes restored. And you don't see many of these. There's a set of onion domes in Jersey City Heights on the top of Mount Sinai, Congregation Mount Sinai. And that building is actually even older than United Synagogue of Hoboken. That was 1906, Mount Sinai. But they're not restored like this, and hopefully someday they will be. But it's really, of course, the inside of the building that blew me away. So you go into the foyer, and here are these relics, really, from 1915. So there are tablets on the wall with the names of founders, with the names of building committee members. And I'm always fascinated by that. And again, those are clues. I'm able to take those names and that information and go do research based on that. The stained glass window in the center with the rounded arch, that was for the first synagogue, from the first synagogue, Star of Israel. And they salvaged that when they built this 1915 structure. But all the woodwork is original. And then, of course, the Torah Ark, which is like this beautiful, huge, soaring from floor to ceiling console, really. And that's where the ancient Torahs, this precious Torahs are kept. So it's bejeweled. The whole thing is bejeweled and carved magnificently. And then, of course, it's topped with the Decalogue stained glass memorial window, which is incredible. And then the eternal light is hanging there. It's known as the Ner Tamid. I know I'm not pronouncing it properly. And then the recumbent lions of Judah. So a lot of synagogues will have these lions, usually on the outside of the building. But these are on the inside. And they're all original. This is all original. And I love the menorah. It's kind of a rare 8-branch menorah, brass candelabra, with an American eagle. So you notice the American eagle in this shul is prominent and prevalent. And the rabbi was telling me it's probably because they were proud to be Americans and they were happy to be in America. So they used the American symbol in their liturgical designs. And then these new windows, these are not from 1915. These new windows that went into the aisle level, all the way on the bottom, are by Susan Klein Cohen, who is a member, a congregant here at United Synagogue. And this is kind of her service, right? Her give back to the house of worship that she goes to. And she is really a very talented artisan of stained glass. You have to go in there to see just the glass itself, because it's like big rocks of glass, big nuggets, kind of woven together into these tapestries of creation and the reflections. So they all tell stories. Some of them are quite entertaining. I would imagine children love looking at these. They're kind of very playful and eye-popping. So I would recommend, you ask to go see these. And then, of course, the balconies. This is classic synagogue construction or design, where you have the balconies and then the Torah ark, the grand Torah ark. And the rabbi actually pulled out some of the Torahs and showed me some of these ancient Torahs that are just precious and priceless. And I've seen the Torahs at Mount Sinai in the Heights also. They did, and they have Torahs from Europe, some of them several hundred years old. Really incredible. Any questions about United Synagogue before I move on? Yes, Mary. Oh, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, clarify, please. Yes. 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 Mm-hmm. Right. And actually, the day after I visited with the drone, they were installing glass the next day. I think it's the last set, right? There's a couple more? Okay. Yes. Right. Yes. Right. Yeah, and I recommend everybody, these sites I'm sharing with you, they have websites and they have resources and archives. Check them out. And like you mentioned, there are videos, especially for United Synagogue of Hoboken. I think one of them is a fairly recent documentary. Yeah. And it talks about the glass, and you can meet the artisan, and hear her words. But yeah, I didn't know that the other, she had help from, did she teach them how to do stained glass? Because she's a professional. Yes. Yes. Mm. Because yeah. Because that's fascinating that she's maybe even teaching people how to make stained glass windows, you know? Incredible. Well, thank you. Yes, Mary. Yeah. Oh, I didn't mention the architect. So, well, that I don't know, right? I'm sure it was. I mean, a lot of these synagogues at the turn of the century had onion domes. So I guess they were looking at the ancient synagogues of Europe, Eastern Europe, right? So I would imagine that in 1915 they're still thinking about that, right? And it wasn't until later in the 50s where new synagogues or modern works of mid-century architecture. It was European, yeah, yeah. Um, but so I'm thinking of Mount Sinai again. They're struggling with their onion domes, as grand as they are. They're larger than these. They're struggling to maintain them. These domes are huge. Mostly they were sheathed in copper. In copper, and copper lasts a long time. So I think that's why these domes are still lasting. Doesn't mean they won't leak, though. You know. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the third site. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi. I don't know what was there previously. I'm going to assume it was just blank. It was plain glass, right? Yeah. Usually, memorial glass or congregational glass is to replace a negative space, right, with something significant, something to reflect the congregation. So I would guess for years there was nothing there. Yeah, except the rose window. The rose windows are original. Ah, sorry. I keep struggling with this. I don't know why. Here we go. Am I there? Do I have full screen? Okay. Saints Peter and Paul, right? Now, I'm not going to spend much time on it only because I'm still doing research on this building, but I can tell you, I mean, just from what you can see, it's pretty significant in its style. Did you notice how different it was from Our Lady of Grace, right? Our Lady of Grace is this, high Victorian Gothic building from the 1870s, supposedly, like I said, inspired by ancient French architecture. But this is a whole different level here, more modern level. So this is the 1920s we're talking about. Okay, this is right before Art Deco kind of erases everything, right? The Art Deco movement and then modernism. So this is kind of like the last hurrah, the late 1920s, where the arts and crafts is at its highest level. And when we say arts and crafts, this is a textbook example in Hoboken. One of the best I've seen for arts and crafts. We're talking about simple modernist design. Notice there were no columns in this building. It was just this box, kind of flat planes, right? But you see the ancient signatures. You see the Romanesque in there. You see the rounded arches. The windows are different. The windows look nothing like we saw in Our Lady of Grace. These are medieval revival for that time period. So there are these roundels, these medallions. And these are quite animated. I really recommend you go in there and look at them. Old Testament and New Testament combined. So you have all these discs kind of floating in the air, these images pointing at each other. And so you kind of just have to go like this, back and forth, and you see these really animated stories from the Bible, the New Testament and the Old Testament. And you see beheadings in these. You see, magical animals. Really, I think it's great for children to look at, kind of storybook because the Bible tells great stories, right? And it's in the stained glass. And the architect was a Boston architect. I'm not going to tell you who he is, because at the next talk I give, I'm going to return to this church and tell you who he is, but he's pretty significant. And the parish doesn't even know who the architect is. On their website, it says the architect is unknown. No, he's not. But he will remain unknown until I return, because I'm going to look at his archives up in Boston. He was a Boston architect. And he has a lot of buildings in Boston that look just like this one in Hoboken. And the stained glass, the Pike Studios did the stained glass. They're still in business after over 100 years. They're based in Rochester, New York, so I have to make a visit up to them. So I will come back to you guys with, my discoveries for that. The ceiling is incredible. So in true arts and crafts era fashion, wood, hammer beam, massive. It's like the bottom of a ship just hanging in the air, all braced together with iron plates. Yes? No. So that cornerstone is inside the lobby. That's the first building, 1889. And then in the late 1920s, 28, 29, they rebuild, and they decided to keep the old cornerstone as part of the foyer, or the narthex, as they call it. So that's the clue there. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go to what I think is the best for last type of situation. I'll show you the film, and then we'll talk about it, and then I have something to read to you, and then we will conclude, and you can check out their exhibit here. Where's Bob? Is it Bob gone? He's gone, okay. Sorry, I keep doing this. I can't tell you how grateful I am that I was allowed to go in here. I cannot tell you. Because this is a building no one's allowed to go into. And all I can tell you is think Game of Thrones when you're watching this, okay? Wide tapestry. Paid for by Martha Stevens, who was, the person responsible for building this church in memory of her daughter. But I'm not going to give that away because I'm going to read it to you. Did you think of Game of Thrones? As I stand within the cooling, stone-cast shadows of the church of the Holy Innocents, a cruciform funerary chapel that ascends along 6th Street in Hoboken between Clinton and Willow. I behold a beauteous landmark born of tragedy abroad. This, I conclude, is an episcopal edifice reared from the hand of an architectural genius, a bejeweled edifice mortared together by a mother's mourning and sustained by a plague-stricken spirit whose young visage vexes, after 135 years, these grassy grounds. I wrote this 20 years ago, by the way. I know the sorrowful story, and I follow its faraway trail to Rome, where, in the final days of 1870, it begins. So standing in front of Holy Innocents, you got to go back to Rome in 1870. In 1870, Martha Bayard Stevens boarded a transatlantic ocean liner docked at a Hoboken wharf for what was supposed to be an incident-free family trip to Europe. Her 3 young children, Julia, Caroline, and Richard, were in tow, possibly for the first time since the death in Paris 2 years earlier of their famous inventor father, Edwin Augustus Stevens, heir to the Hoboken-based Stevens family legacy and fortune. At some point during the vacation, Julia, at 7 years old, the eldest of Martha's children, contracted typhoid and, after suffering feverish spells and other organ-ravaging symptoms of the then incurable disease, died on the eve of the Vigil of the Holy Innocents, a post-Christmas observance commemorating the slaughter of thousands of male infants in Bethlehem during the time of Jesus' birth. Julia, like the unsuspecting victims of the brutal King Herod, was seized from the world Martha and Edward Stevens had given her. Her solemn funeral was held at St. Paul's Chapel in Rome, and interment took place in an ancient Protestant cemetery where the likes of John Keats and Percy Shelley were buried. Martha returned to America completely changed, heartbroken, the bearer of incomparable loss. But her grief was soon transformed into renewal. While the Stevenses were already renowned and respected for their philanthropy in Hoboken, Edward had, before his death, founded and bequeathed the Engineering Institute at Castle Point that still carries on the family tradition of scientific study and innovation. Compassion, concern, and caring welled up in Martha to the point that she became sort of a walking saint, a voice for all, quote, holy innocents, children and parents both. She was called a saint. 2 years after stepping foot on Hoboken soil again, Martha conceived plans for a sacred space that would immortalize Julia, and at the same time, welcome without cost the thousands of German and Irish immigrants crowding the city's factories and tenements. The inspired mother took time out from overseeing the family's civic institutions all over Hoboken, including Martha's Institute, a home for girls that she herself had organized in the late 1860s. And that building still stands, by the way. In 1872, she established the Episcopal Church of the Holy Innocents inside a small frame house at Clinton and Grand Streets. And 4 months later, the cornerstone for a grand structure designed by the Gothic Revival master Edward Tuckerman Potter, famed for his initial design of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and later the Mark Twain Mansion in Connecticut, was laid at a large swath of land on 6th Street. And that's what you saw from that drone image. Following Martha's specifications, Potter, highly influenced by the architecture of Augustus Welby Pugin and the theoretical writings of John Ruskin, created an eye-popping Gothic storybook structure of astounding artistry and grace that has little to no equal in Hudson County. The exaggerated exterior of soft, multi-toned sandstone squares, some scarred with chisel strikes, others untooled, raw, weathered, consists of brownstone, whitestone, and purple sandstone quarried from the sloped cliffs of North Bergen, alternating in bands across thick trefoil arched clerestory windows and soaring versours. The gabled roofs are covered in colorful, tessellated tiles that glisten like flattened gems. An imposing Norman battlement tower designed and added to the church in 1895 by the esteemed architect Henry Vaughan shoots out of the center of the church. Floriated window traceries are so thick and heavy that flying buttresses coped with brownstone must brace their loads. The interior is richer, darker, tomb-like, filled with peaceful depths. Rows of polished pink granite pillars seemed gargantuan in scale, yet fit snug within the whole space, as if they were an optical illusion. A high rose window facing north fans out triangularly, its intricate tracery adorned with pillars, capitals, cusps, and lions' heads, all designed, by the way, by Potter himself. Below them, kneeling in anguish, is the biblical Rachel, symbol of murder and mourning. Deeper inside, and on axis with the center aisle, stained glass windows manufactured in England by royal artisans Clayton and Bell fill the solemn, vacant sanctum, with a south-facing Gothic arch rose rendered in blazing tapestry gold. The story of Julia I had just discovered does not end in Rome. Years after the girl's death, Martha worked up the courage to have her disinterred and brought back to Hudson County for burial in the Bergen Reformed Church Cemetery on Bergen Avenue in Jersey City, where the Stevenses owned a few plots. And to be honest, they owned everything, the Stevenses. Finally, in 1899, the year of Martha's own death, Julia's remains were moved, and this was quietly, by family members to their permanent resting place inside the Stevens Crypt in Hoboken Cemetery in North Bergen, bringing mother and daughter together again after 29 years of separation. Though Holy Innocents congregation has long been discontinued and its thick, heavy doors have been sealed in perpetual silence, I sense a pulse. I realize that the splendid face of Julia Stevens is absent from her own shrine. And I come to understand, as Martha Stevens did when she conceived the memorial masterpiece in 1872, that no visage was needed to remind contemplative congregants of Julia's shortened life. For her form had been passed from flesh to stone, bone to glass, a passage into architecture guided by her beloved mother. Thank you. Now, I'm sure you have a lot of questions about Holy Innocents. Like, can you get me in there? I used that card, and it was only once I can use it. So no, I can't get you in there. But it's one of the most overlooked treasures of Hoboken, of New Jersey, if you ask me, for so many levels, so many reasons. Art, architectural, social, cultural. It closed as a parish, I think 35 years ago, 40 years ago. Churches close, unfortunately. Yeah. The parish used that as school. Before it was an art studio. Okay. You mean the old Martha's Institute building? No. Oh, okay. The parsonage, yeah. Yes. Yeah. One parish, right. A lot of merges go on, right? Yes. Okay. Yes. All Saints, yes. Yes, All Saints. And that's on my next list, All Saints, because there's a deep connection to Holy Innocents, obviously. And St. Paul's on Hudson is no longer a church. It's now residences. But it was the first in Hoboken in 1986 to convert a religious building to residential. And it kind of raised the bar real high. Yes. And he bought it because the roof line was straight. Right. And he said, I can build it. Wow. Because the roof line was full. Right. Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can actually go inside, right? Yeah. So remember, guys, buy your Christmas tree from the front lawn of Holy Innocents, and you can get in. Oh, so maybe they're closing it. I mean, there are a lot of structural issues. I can tell you that now. I was in there. First of all, I've never seen so many mosquitoes in my life. Okay? And there's a lot of structural issues. I'll leave it at that. Okay? But I will say, Potter kind of became famous when he built this. He was already famous. But he was the first to use an iron superstructure for the roof. And that's what's keeping that building from not falling. That's one of the reasons. Of course, it's overbuilt stone-wise, right? Masonry-wise, but it has an iron superstructure roof, and there's like no leaks, and that's the original tiles too. So that stuff lasts forever, but not forever, right? Yes, back there. Yes. Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Wow. Oh, really? Well, I saw pieces of other churches in there too, like St. Paul's, which is now the Abbey. I saw some of their memorial plaques that were taken out and they were just stored in Holy Innocents. But there are treasures that I even talked to you about that are in there. You saw the tapestry. That's from Germany. And Martha Stevens brought that over. She was still traveling right before her death. And she was kind of like Pierpont Morgan, just looking at artworks, ancient artworks, saying, okay, I'm buying it, have it shipped. And she put it inside Holy Innocents. Quite a few really, beautiful works of art from Europe. She hired Clayton and Bell to do those windows. Clayton and Bell, rare windows. If you go to Grace Church on Broadway, they are Clayton and Bell. But you will not find them anywhere else, really. It's very few Clayton and Bell. And they were known as the royal stained glass makers because the Queen wanted their work inside the European cathedrals. No, there was enough to go around for all denominations, large populations coming in, right? So these buildings were not empty. They were filled several times a day, services. Yeah. Any other questions? I hope you learned something, and I hope you are excited to go visit these sites, right? And if you want to come with me on my future journeys for a little visit, I'll let you do some of the camera work. No, I'm just kidding. But look, I look forward to doing the next set and surprising everybody. Thank you. It's going to be next year, probably winter or spring. Yeah. I need that much time. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.